Well, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It's just lovely to see you. And I'm Cindy Peister with UUJEC's Peace, Equity, and Climate Task Force. And we've been wanting to do a show or a webinar on AI for some time because it's just impacting everybody's lives in the future going forward. And I feel very confident that you're going to really appreciate the speaker that we have um, to present on this tonight. Dr. Nicholas Rabb is going to speak on demystifying AI-powered militarization and its social and ecological consequences. Um, I first met Nick when I was trying to find somebody from the Sunrise Movement who supported the concept that military emissions need to be a part of the climate discussion. And I really had a serious search on my hands with that. And then I found Nick, and I knew right away that he had some real leadership potential for the future. And that has indeed been borne out, not just by my early assessment, but by Joseph Gerson, who heads up the campaign for peace, disarmament, and common security. And Joseph chose Nick to go with him to the World Conference against atomic and hydrogen bombs in Japan that just happened here in coordination with the 80th bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So Nick really does bring a lot to the table. He's a scholar, educator, and movement leader working at the intersection of technology, ethics, and social change. He's got a PhD in computer science and cognitive science, specializing in misinformation studies. Um, Dr. Rabb has published academic research, spoken at major conferences in the United States and internationally, and developed pioneering academic courses illuminating the politics of emerging technologies like AI and their role in maintaining societal control and political status quo. He's currently working on a book entitled The Domination Crisis: How the Shared Roots of Militarism and the Climate Crisis Are Shaping Our Planet's Future. So, with that short intro, I turn the floor over to you, Nick, and I think you're all going to really appreciate his presentation. He's going to be speaking for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A to follow. So go ahead, Nick. The floor is yours.
Okay. Wow. Thank you so much, Cindy. That's is such a lovely and warm introduction. And I'm, so grateful to be here, so grateful to continue to be in community with Cindy and meet all of you tonight. And yeah, just very, very thankful to be here and excited to talk about something that yeah, sort of intersects all of my areas that I've worked on, as Cindy said, in climate, anti-militarism, what I studied for my PhD, computer science, cognitive science. This is sort of the crossroads of all of those. And as Cindy was saying, I mean, it is something that's really on pretty much everybody's minds today. This sort of, what's going on with AI, even what is AI, and how should we all be dealing with it? So hopefully you all will learn a little bit tonight, and we'll have a nice discussion as well. I have some slides that I'll share. They're not incredibly important, but hopefully it'll give you something nice to look at while I'm up here yapping at you. So let me begin. Um, okay, so I always like to start by sort of uh, priming us by thinking about, yeah, what do you usually think about when we think about military AI? Right. I took the left screenshot from the recent Mission Impossible movie. The middle one is from 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the one on the right has the name on it, but it's from the movie I, Robot, which is of course based on the Asimov novel. So um, typically, what people think about when we think about military and AI. People think about killer robots, right? Super intelligent, sentient war machines, AI taking over the world, running the economy, etc. And these visions are concocted from Hollywood and actually quite far from what is the reality of AI technology. Yet at the same time, even though they're not really what we have, they represent this sort of deep-seated fear of certain aspects of technology meets society that do have legitimate roots and are worthy of considering, especially as AI is being really pushed into society, particularly this year by big tech and the Trump administration. These fears are growing. And they're also growing, as we all sort of know, because now we can all sort of talk with these chat bots, and there's generative artificial intelligence, which is creating, fake images that look totally real and videos that look totally real. So how are we supposed to deal with all of this? It's sort of all on our minds. Um, so I'm gonna, yeah, discuss, this AI this new wave of AI in the two contexts, intersecting contexts. One of militarism, which sort of illustrating here, but the other one is the ecological impact of AI. And the two have a lot to do with each other. As was sort of saying, I spent a lot of my time when I was doing my PhD, trying to create ways of thinking about the intersections of climate and militarism, because they're actually incredibly deep. The two sort of crises share a lot in common. So we'll have all those lenses sort of working together as we investigate this. Um, so eventually, hopefully, I'll convince you that the realities of AI militarism are very different than what we think about from Hollywood or what big tech executives like Zuckerberg or Sam Altman from OpenAI are saying about artificial intelligence. So let's begin, I suppose, because I guess because now I've landed myself in academia, I always have to start with a bit of historicizing and talking about how we even got here in the first place. But I think it's particularly useful for AI because as I've come to learn, the history of the technology has a lot to do with what we're seeing today and can be, yeah, very useful for parsing out what we're going through right now. So I draw mostly from this incredible work, this book called Artificial Whiteness by Yarden Katz, who's a pretty good friend of mine, which describes sort of a critical recounting of the history of AI. Katz writes that AI, particularly from the standpoint of the US, has always been a tool in the service of US empire and capital. So think of, the state, government, and corporations. And throughout the decades, AI has sort of been this like morphing concept that becomes whatever is most convenient to the government and to corporations at a given time. And he illustrates this by sort of going through the history. So this all sort of began in the 1950s and 60s as emerging computer scientists. There's a field called cybernetics back then that was very popular, thinking about sort of, human intelligence and cognition and computer science. Uh, all these people from institutions like MIT and Stanford were coming together to think about what they started coining as artificial intelligence. And back then, I think Katz says at least 70, probably over 70% of the research that was done on AI at institutions like Stanford and MIT was funded by the Pentagon. So even way back then, nearly 100 years ago, there were sort of these visions being concocted of artificial intelligence. The scholars who were researching it, it may sound funny now, but they were thinking this thing that's called artificial general intelligence. So human level artificial intelligence, even in the 50s and 60s, they were saying that was, maybe just a few years away. We could be taken over by artificial intelligence any day now. They were saying this, they were hyping it up, and the Pentagon was pouring a ton of money into AI research. Um, And it turns out, we know in hindsight from 2025 that the AI technologies of the 1950s and 60s did not take over humanity. In fact, um, and this is sort of, it created a boom and a bust, is the way that Katz talks about it. And we've had a couple cycles of this since that period. So there was one in the 50s and 60s. There was another sort of bubble of hype and then a burst around the 80s when the technology morphed a little bit. And now the technology has morphed again. And it seems that, from the late 2010s and 2020s, we might be in one of these bubbles of hype and burst. But it remains to be seen because we're sort of living through it. But all that sort of suffices to say that actually, one of the problems that has plagued AI throughout its history is that the concept of intelligence and what counts as artificial intelligence constantly changes. So in the 60s, for example, an algorithm, a program that would be used to, for example, map you through different streets to get you from point A to point B would be considered artificial intelligence, and it'd be considered a human level intelligence task. Now we all do that with our phones. It's in the GPS, it's in the cars. We don't consider it artificial intelligence anymore. It's just a computer algorithm. Every student who goes through a computer science program learns this algorithm. It's quite simple. Um, and this idea of what counts as artificial intelligence has changed with each wave of AI. In actuality, human level intelligence is incredibly hard to define, and the tasks that AI is measured with are typically very narrow measures of intelligence. So, for example, what we see now, things like chatbots or classifying objects in images or recognizing faces, is also an incredibly narrow sense of intelligence, right? It's not considering other aspects of intelligence, of which there are tons, but just a few that are not taken into the conversation are things like emotional intelligence, having some sort of sense of morals or empathy or general, worldview and context. These don't make it into sort of AI conversations. Um, Katz contends that that's predominantly because of the influence of the military on AI development. Because the military has been the primary funder of AI for nearly 80 years, the problems that AI is concerned with are typically military style problems. So if you think of things like object detection or facial recognition, that's always to find targets for military strikes. Something like speech translation, using AI to translate, used to spy on enemies or decode enemy intelligence, and then systems that are designed to do planning that you might use to whatever organize your calendar or send an email. Planning has always been devised as this idea of AI-driven strategy. So the military has had historically a huge hand on the development of AI technologies. So it's not surprising that AI has been so shaped by military influence that we have these imaginations of AI taking over the world, killer robots waging war on us. It's always been tied up with the military. And the history is very useful because as we turn to now the current moment in AI and militarism, we see that the same thing is basically true. So I'll uplift three important documents that I think reveal a lot about the current state of AI thinking from the US government perspective. The first came out in 2018. It was the Department of Defense Artificial Intelligence Strategy. This sort of set the stage for how the US government and the military were thinking about AI in this new wave, in this new period. It set out four key goals. The first of which is that one, AI supremacy is essential for national security. Two, AI supremacy is essential for market supremacy. Three, China and Russia are the main AI competitors threatening US supremacy. And four, that the US government has to rapidly pursue partnerships with industry and academia to develop and push AI to meet the first three goals. So basically, since 2018, that's what we've seen. This laid out sort of the plan, the, you know, military, corporate, academia partnerships to develop AI And really, the thing that they talk about all the time is sort of win the AI arms race between the US, China, and Russia. And for some reason, it's supposed to be existentially threatening if we lose the AI arms race, but no one is, really saying why that's the case. But supposedly we're supposed to believe this, and supposedly that's why we need to pour all this money into AI. Um, and they've become very common talking points, both for government officials and corporate sort of big tech executives. And the subsequent documents more or less followed suit. There is a 29 Army modernization strategy document that discussed basically the same things, but it was part of Biden's, was it part of Biden? No, it was right before Biden's administration. He had a bit of a hand in sort of pushing for a focus on ethical artificial intelligence, which has been subsequently dropped. Um, but this report also does a lot of framing of Russia and China as fundamental threats and arguing they're developing AI armies and hypersonic missiles and robotics and drone swarms, which I think are fairly unsubstantiated. And then in 2021, the final report whose cover I put on the right, was written by a temporary commission called the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence. This was a commission interestingly headed by Eric Schmidt, who was the former CEO of Google, who since he left Google has been deeply involved with a host of US military and AI projects. So this report had a heavy sort of corporate influence on it, and it departed a bit from previous reports in that it focused more on AI contributing rather than sort of autonomous weapons and things like this, more to informational advantages on the battlefield and informational warfare. Things like decision-making systems, cyber operations, what they call cognitive warfare, which is basically propaganda systems and AI systems to monitor the battlefield, reducing the fog of war, as they sort of talk about it. This 2021 report is very important because, in my estimation, it foreshadowed exactly what has happened in the years that came since. And I think it's not surprising because it was written, or this commission was headed by Eric Schmidt, who is from Google. So what's happened in the years since is, you know, the US government has its vision of AI, corporations have their visions of AI and militarism. There have been tons of enormous contracts between big tech and the US military to develop information systems to support and conduct warfare. So companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Palantir, etc., took on dozens and dozens of contracts worth hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to develop systems for Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and the DoD, to support their war efforts. Um, so I pulled some of these numbers from a project called, I think, Crescendo Project, conducted by the Action Research Center on Race and the Economy, Empower Change, and Little Sis. Is sort of a collaboration project. And they did these calculations of how much some of these companies have been paid to develop AI systems for the military. So they calculated, for example, that Amazon has been paid over $1 billion in Department of Defense contracts. Microsoft has been paid $42 billion in DoD contracts, and Google $16 million in DoD contracts. They also calculate that, I mean, you can see on the screen, but the Department of Homeland Security has paid Amazon nearly $78 million, Microsoft $226 million, and Google about $2 million. And I think, in my view, these may be conservative estimates. I didn't look into their methods, but so these are just for domestic systems. Also, keep in mind. So because we'll talk about the ones used abroad in a second. But basically, by and large, these contracts were commissioned to build things like massive biometric databases to store biometric data on every individual living in the United States. Um, these companies were paid to host AI software and military software on their cloud computing platforms. They were paid to develop software that could search social media for people to deport. Um, and this is an international one, but I thought it was interesting to include. It was also recently reported and leaked that Google was paid even millions of dollars by the Israeli government to spread Israeli propaganda on YouTube. So there's a lot of profit to be made in the business of militarism, which is, not surprising to people like us who are sort of familiar with the idea of the military-industrial complex. It's been, a major economic or a point of like US economic policy since, I mean, really since the Second World War, when Eisenhower was warning about it and blah, 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 stuff like that, and ramped up in the Cold War. But this is sort of the newest flavor. These, multi-million, hundreds of million, billions of dollar contracts are all sort of starting to be revolve around AI technologies. And the same is true for systems developed abroad. So big tech companies based in the US are also developing systems for other countries. Um, this paradigm actually sort of started with a project you may have heard of called Project Maven, which was a US government attempt to use AI to do object and facial detection, as well as social network mapping, as they were waging a war in Iraq and Afghanistan. So they wanted to use the systems to like map terrorist networks, reduce the fog of war on the battlefield and detect enemy combatants and stuff like this. That was called Project Maven. Project Maven was notoriously protested by Google employees in 2018. You may have heard about that. It generated a ton of bad PR for Google and other companies, big tech companies as well. And then in response, Google claimed to drop the project in response to the protest, but really they just sort of quietly continued it. And then other companies started doing the same thing. But this sort of set a standard for how to use AI for sort of foreign wars, how big tech can partner with different militaries to do this kind of thing. Um, and that has developed into tech companies then, most notably, developing strong relationships with Israel to construct software for then what was their apartheid regime in Palestine in the occupied territories, and now their campaign of genocide. Notably in 2021, Google was again under fire for its role in a $1.2 billion valued Project Nimbus, which was co-developed with Amazon, which was also aimed at creating AI systems for object detection, enemy recognition, emotion detection, and facial recognition to use in the occupied territories. So this was going to be used by the Israeli government in Palestine. There was a huge uproar, and that project did not stop, in fact. And it was not really able to be halted, and it continues to this day. But also the big tech companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Starlink, which is one of the Elon Musk companies, and Palantir have been involved in the war in Ukraine, developing cyber defense tech and strategic planning systems. And even very recently, Microsoft has been in some hot water under reports that its Azure cloud services have been being used to store data to surveil Palestinians by the Israeli government. So basically, this is all to say the big tech companies have figured out that they can make enormous, enormous amounts of money by doing these military contracts. Notably, also for making surveillance systems for the US government. And I'll get back to that in a little bit. It's this idea of as I'll illustrate in this in a bit. Uh, if you all have ever heard the phrase like the war comes home, often these technologies that are developed and used in foreign wars, wars abroad, end up making their way back into policing and sort of paramilitary style control tactics in the US. But I'll put a pin in that for now, and we can sort of talk about the ecological dimension of AI, which has really been in the news a lot lately. And I think is, yeah, something that's really turning a lot of people off of AI. Um, yeah, a lot of reports have been coming out recently that AI has a huge ecological footprint, and we're still working to understand even how big that footprint may be as the technologies continue to develop and proliferate. Um, there's a good recent UN article report, I suppose, titled AI End to End that described the environmental impact of AI through its whole life cycle. So it's useful to look at it from the creation of the computers all the way through their usage. Um, and a handful of reports have also been coming out from MIT describing the impacts of new general AI, or I'm sorry, generative AI models like ChatGPT, Copilot, and others. So the simple version that I sort of lay out in this very crude diagram, I suppose, is that AI technology relies on massive amounts of computation, which require the manufacture of a ton of computer chips, computers, and places to house them and connect them all together. So starting with just the manufacture of chips and computers, these systems, the chips that run the AI systems, are dependent on rare earth elements, things like actually, I won't be able to name more than one. Cobalt is the one that I know the most about because it's been a huge point of contention for its use in sort of modern chip architecture. But there's plenty of others. There's a report I recently read that I can send around after if you all are interested. But these rare earth elements are mined in pretty unsustainable and inhumane ways, often with, forced labor types of programs paying people. I mean, you can hardly even say you're paying them. And they work in horrible conditions, develop all sorts of conditions and diseases. And it's also become a point of international conflict over these rare earth elements. If you remember back earlier in the year when Trump was sort of sparring with Zelensky, talking about, I'm not going to help you achieve peace with Russia unless you give us access to the. I always hated how he would say it, to the rare earths. He would say the rare earths in Ukraine. We need the rare earths. But that is a manifestation of this desire to build infrastructure for AI. The US does not have as rich of a sort of repository of these resources as Ukraine. There's some countries in Africa who have, like in the Congo, they have a lot. And in China, China actually, I think, is the leading. They have the most deposits of these elements. So that's all to say the manufacture of even the computers that run the AI systems is an incredibly environmentally costly process. And we know this. So then these computers are used to what's called train the models, which is basically involves taking the entire internet and then a lot more movies, all the books that have ever been written, a massive, massive, massive amount of data and feeding it into a computational system that sort of molds it into what we call the model. So that's what you end up chatting with when you chat with ChatGPT. That's a model that has been fed basically the internet several times over. This requires a ton of computational processing because it has to hold all that data and crunch all these numbers to sort of grow this sort of semi-intelligent system, which is why you've probably heard about all these new data centers being constructed all over the United States to support this AI training and usage. Recent research from MIT has estimated that training something like ChatGPT, if you were to feed in the same amount of data to a different computational process, the process of training an AI actually uses 7 to 8 times the energy that the same computation would use feeding the data into something that's not AI. So even just the process of AI algorithms themselves are more energy costly. It's not even just how much data you're feeding in. But then comes the sort of final part on the end. We're all using these models, right, to ask them how to cheat on our homework and asking them how to cook recipes and how to develop a company and whatever people ask AI these days. Um, this is also incredibly energy costly. It consumes a lot of energy. Um, the same group of MIT researchers estimated that, for example, asking a query that you would put into Google, like a question, if you ask it to something like ChatGPT, it actually uses 5 times the amount of energy as if you would just put it into Google. So imagine that on a scale of millions of people doing that all the time, very costly. Um, and all the while, all these data centers that are being constructed, they're generating enormous amounts of heat, which needs to be cooled by water. So communities that have had these data centers built in them are facing water scarcity issues because they're sucking up all the water to use it to power AI to help my students cheat on their homework, and it's only projected to get worse. The Department of Energy estimated recently that data centers' energy usage in the US is projected to double or triple by 2028. It's only a couple of years out from now, and that's probably a conservative estimate. So the resource intensity is going to be quite a lot as AI systems develop. Um, But these are not just issues of the future. I also wanted to uplift that communities across the US are already feeling the effects of the push for data center construction, which is predominantly being done in poor, rural, and Black and brown communities, which, in whatever the calculations of these companies maybe can't fight back as much, or, the states are more interested in offering tax incentives to these companies to try to bolster their local economies. So governors and companies are actually arguing, oh, building data centers for AI will create jobs in our communities and bring in tax money. But critics and locals are saying these will be temporary jobs. It won't create a sustainable economy. And the environmental cost is not worth it. So I wanted to uplift one recent case from Memphis where residents are fighting the construction of a data center being created by xAI, which is Elon Musk's AI company. They want to build a huge AI training site near a community called Boxtown, which is predominantly a Black community. Building the data center has required a ton of energy, and then using it to train the models has required so much that the local grid could not actually meet the energy requirements. xAI then chose to meet the energy requirements by bringing in 35 unpermitted gas turbines, which has reduced the air quality in the local area. Residents started complaining about not being able to breathe as well. So then researchers at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville actually analyzed the air quality around the turbines in Boxtown before and after they brought in the generators and concluded yes, that there are significant concentrations of air pollution that are putting residents in danger. In June, the NAACP sent an intent to sue to xAI for violating the Clean Air Act. And in July, actually, nearly 100 protesters gathered in front of their local community health department to try to fight for their right to breathe clean air. And this is just the story of one community. It's actually happening all across the United States in areas like Pennsylvania, West Virginia. I'm trying to think of some others. I have a whole list of others that I can share with you all later. But so this is sort of becoming a new thing, a new sort of
Corvallis,
environmental. Oh, sorry, what was it, Charles?
Corvallis,
In
Oregon.
Corvallis?
It's
There you go.
everywhere.
It's everywhere, exactly. So yeah, these are becoming a new sort of environmental justice issue, just to build AI technology. Um, and so the current moment is perhaps best exemplified by President Trump's administration's new AI action plan, which was released in July of this year, and it contains the administration's vision for an AI-fueled society and how to transition to it. And, the plan, you can read it yourself. It contains some interesting stuff, some stupid stuff, but of note, the quotes that I pulled out are, I think, very illuminating because it partially calls for some use of adoption of AI in the Department of Defense, but it mostly spends most of its time talking about using like cutting through red tape, so to speak, deregulating so that AI infrastructure can be built quickly, innovation won't be stifled, and we can compete notably with China in the AI arms race. There's one part where it pushes for how it says unencumbered construction of data centers and power generation infrastructure for AI by ignoring things like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, or by opening federal lands for construction, or this is the most ironic one, using an AI program developed by the Department of Energy to approve new AI permits. That one really tickled me in a way that made me want to cry. So it's quite strange, this plan, but you can see that I mean, it's really being pushed for quite fervently by the administration and by its corporate partners. And notably, you read through it and you notice that the AI action plan doesn't actually say much about military AI. It has this small section, maybe about the Department of Defense and pushing for adoption and maybe some cybersecurity things, but you know, it doesn't seem to be the main priority of the administration. We're still notably waiting for apparently it's going to come out soon, the 2025 National Defense Strategy. So maybe there's more that will be said in that document, but for now, we're not seeing a real huge push for use of AI in military systems, other than those sort of old documents that I alluded to earlier that I suppose now are like 7 years old that were envisioning these AI military futures. And it may be because from the military standpoint, commanders and officials within the military and military scholars have started to be a bit more vocal, saying that the AI hype is not meeting the reality of the military's capabilities. This is becoming true in sort of the general, more like using AI for industry world as well, but it's specifically true for military AI. There's a lengthy article written for the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists by U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Paul Lushenko, who's also an instructor at the U.S. Army War College, and Keith Carter, who's an associate professor at the U.S. Naval War College, describing how the military is struggling to adopt and integrate AI technologies into their operations. They sort of write three main critiques. First, that this new AI military industrial complex driven by big tech does not understand how the military works at all, and they don't understand the day-to-day operations. Second, that the AI arms race narrative is overshadowing what the military actually wants to think about in terms of using justifiable uses of AI for violence and warfare. And third, which I thought was a bit funny, the soldiers just don't trust AI tools, which there's a huge literature actually on AI and trust that a handful of my colleagues still work on and used to work on when I knew them. It's sort of a crisis that people don't trust AI systems probably because they don't work. But you don't need to research it to understand that. But basically, so these two conclude, and I put this quote up that the current debate on AI, on military AI, is largely driven by tech bros and other entrepreneurs who stand to profit immensely from military's uptake of AI-enabled capabilities, unquote. So it's sort of even in the military, they're realizing that, maybe AI is not all it's cracked up to be. We're not really able to do this, but these companies are making enormous profits off of pushing us to develop systems and having these visions of militarized AI. So if you sort of compare it, what they say AI can do, which is, yeah, autonomous weapons, smart munitions, battlefield intelligence, super soldiers, drone swarms, it's not really what even practitioners in the military are saying is possible, right? What AI is actually being used for right now is things like mass surveillance, uh, fueling projects of state policing, border militarization, and propaganda. And even at that, the systems are quite flawed and they get a lot of things wrong. They make incorrect conclusions, but they're just being used anyway. So it's sort of like, Katz was describing in his history of AI and military. You could argue that this is another hype bubble, right? We saw in the 2021 National Security Commission on AI report that AI companies and the government realized that they could most effectively use AI tools not to make autonomous weapons, but to conduct information warfare. So there are what we're seeing right now is the best military use of AI are the domestic versions of systems that were tested and used abroad in Afghanistan, Iraq, Israel, and Palestine. The real threat from AI is its sort of ability to supercharge existing campaigns of policing, deportation, border enforcement, and propaganda. And I wanted to sort of uplift a cautionary note as well, sort of on this idea of the war coming home. Um, AI was also notoriously used by the Israeli regime in Palestine, both for, as I described, the creation and enforcement of the world's most devious and horrible apartheid regime, but it was also used for how they called automated target generation for its airstrikes that have decimated Gaza. Um, the surveillance systems used for apartheid were called Blue and Red Wolf, respectively, and they were essentially huge databases that were fed data from networks of CCTV cameras. Israeli soldiers would walk around and take photos of Palestinians, and it would be used to track every single Palestinian and govern their movement through the system of checkpoints that was set up to dictate where they can and can't go. The targeting systems that were used in Palestine, there were three notable ones that were reported on last year. They were used to choose buildings to airstrike, choose individuals to airstrike, and to detect when target individuals returned to their homes so they could destroy the whole home and kill the entire family as a more effective way of, in their idea, I guess, fighting Hamas or however they want to sell it. So these systems, especially within Israel, were sort of touted as a campaign of precision, hyper-technological, AI-based ways of fighting terror. This is their whole sort of shtick, right? It's their whole sort of propaganda facade to cover basically a genocidal intent. So I just wanted to say that I think the danger here is that these systems too could potentially find analogs in US domestic policing and paramilitary. Take the idea of precision strikes, right, with targets generated by AI. That could be used in policing efforts to say, oh, we're using these hyper smart AI systems to find people to arrest or find people, communities to police. Systems of mass surveillance could be used to, govern the movements of people the US deems as criminal, could be immigrants, pro-Palestine activists, what have you. The idea of AI being a way to wage precise military warfare or policing is an incredibly dangerous one that needs to be countered because, in fact, these systems are incredibly biased. All of the writing that was done about the Israeli systems used in Palestine showed that they were not smartly targeting Palestinians at all. These systems were not designed to find terrorists or anything like this. They were basically designed to find regular Palestinian people and just act as a facade for killing them, so they could present a more palatable view to the West, but present, basically the reality internally to their own society. Um, I realize I am yapping. I said I would kind of cut it short, but now I'm going on. So I'll spend a few more minutes sort of tying it together and saying a little bit about what I think we can do. Um, So a few years ago, when I was spending some time really deeply diving into the intersections of climate crisis and militarism, I sort of came up with this useful framework that I've used since then. It's this idea of what I started calling the domination crisis. I think it's a dynamic that our society is in right now that makes it incredibly hard to break out of this spiral towards sort of authoritarianism. I thought of it in the context of the climate crisis, where a sort of multi-step reasoning, climate crisis leads to things like extreme weather and ecological destruction, which leads to things like migration, protest, disobedience, organizing, which is then met by a reaction from corporations and states that are already in power, right? So we're seeing militarized borders, rhetorics of xenophobia, propaganda saying we're having a border invasion, climate crisis is not real, it's overhyped, be afraid of lefty protesters, they're terrorists, all in an effort to secure and maintain corporate profit and state power, which is fundamentally predicated on emitting, polluting, extracting, misusing land, which then fuels the climate crisis, which leads to more protest and more repression. So it's almost like this downward spiral into doom, basically, where the state militarizes and corporations help them militarize because we're pushing back. This is what I was sort of calling the domination crisis, a dynamic that we're in. And as I was thinking about AI, it's actually kind of shocking to me how well AI fits into this idea of domination crisis. It touches so many parts of it. It's being used right now to militarize borders, to find immigrants, to deport, to find international students to try to deport, surveil their social media. It's being used to generate propaganda. Trump just used it to like make this image of him like parodying a movie, something about, I don't know, the Department of War taking over Chicago. And they're using this, right, like as a propaganda tactic. And as I was describing these enormous um, systems are, or these systems are generating enormous profit for big tech as they're engaging in this sort of new military industrial complex around AI that's requiring data centers and chip manufacturing that leads to pollution and extraction and targeting communities. So it's sort of like fitting perfectly into this idea of this joint, capitalist state repressive cycle that if we don't break out of, AI is sort of poised to just supercharge, basically, um, which I think is an important point because um, oh, maybe I'll say it here instead. What in my estimation, AI is not necessarily the worst problem of this whole thing. It's more just that AI is being used to sort of supercharge existing problems. So if you were to imagine campaigns fighting against what I've just been talking about, I kind of mostly want to say that we shouldn't necessarily worry ourselves about fighting specifically against AI. But I also wanted to include some things that you can do, and then I'll get to the spend maybe 1 minute saying the more like fundamental things I think we should be doing. But things that I think I would love for you to take away from all the, things that I just said at you, that you can bring to your own communities and your own organizing efforts is like you can be part of countering this AI hype, especially when it comes to militarism. You can sort of spread this truth that there are not really autonomous weapons and, AI doomsday kind of things, but it's actually just that AI is being used to continue efforts of policing and surveillance, deportation, and sort of accelerate authoritarianism. And you can be very clear and loud that big tech is also not to be trusted, and that they're developing all these systems and trying to sort of hide that they're doing horrible things. There have been a lot of also unionization efforts at big tech companies. Those are really worth supporting. Like within Google, the Alphabet workers have unionized. Workers inside of Microsoft were protesting their own companies, which I think is a huge part of how we could change this type of dynamic and push back against AI in an effective way. And if there are local sort of data center environmental justice fights around you, maybe, yeah, look for them, see whose communities are being affected and sort of uplift their stories Um, and you could always sort of take a principled stand and not use AI in your own life and explain to people why, because it has all these costs associated with it. Um, but I'll conclude by saying, as I was saying before, we can do these things, and I think they're important. And I think that our main focus should not be fighting AI itself, but asking ourselves the questions, why have we not been able to stop the push for AI? Why can't we stop militarized systems in general? And I think it comes back to this answer that still within our movements, within our faith communities, within our schools, our workplaces, we don't have enough power and consensus to really push back in an effective way. Skip over these, but I was going to highlight how the fights are very similar. But I'll just end by saying I think this part of the diagram in this domination crisis that we're in, the AI fits so neatly into this people's reaction and power's reaction, this power struggle is what we need to really focus on. So that when we do things like protest and civil disobedience and organize, we actually have a chance of not just getting squashed by the reaction of corporations and the state. Uh, that will take sort of a more detailed explanation and a plan. And I'm sorry to tease it, but I did say sort of, more on this to come. It's something I'm actively working on, sort of fleshing out a more defined strategy to address how we can fight back at a sort of more fundamental level, not just on AI and militarization, but on the sort of creep towards authoritarianism it's not even a creep, on the full-fledged authoritarianism that we're seeing in the US today. I think we need a new strategy. Um, Cindy was, mentioning that I was in Japan at the World Conference last month with Joe Gerson, and I was sharing with Cindy. I had the opportunity to hear from organizers in the peace movement and anti-militarism movements from all around the world. And what was really clear is that we're all facing a lot of similar issues with all our countries are militarizing to a huge degree, and we're unsure on how to fight back against it. And there's a need for new strategies and new ways of thinking. Um, so I'll leave you with that's what I'm working on next, and I hope to be able to share that with you and others in the future. So thank you so much for having me. I think we can have like discussion and questions and such. And if you want to follow anything I do, if you're on social media, you could follow me on social media or just send me an email. I love hearing emails from people, and I write a newsletter as well. So if you want to hear what I'm working on. And maybe we can share, I can share out this and other resources probably because I alluded to so many things, maybe after in a follow-up email to the talk. So thank you so much.
Okay, Brian, oh, you're unmuted. Can you ask your question?
Yeah, I started working in public accounting 40 years ago, and CPAs and their clients were getting sentenced for mail fraud, the law which was adopted in the 1870s, and for wire fraud that was adopted in the 1950s. And in 2025, I find it hard to believe that financial criminals are still using the US mail and using bank wires specifically in order to engage in fraud. And I don't see Congress doing its job and regulating, updating anything for our real world with the internet and with artificial intelligence. I'm wondering if the European Union does a better job of both regulating artificial intelligence and also regulating the physical data centers that you also referred to.
Oh, great question. Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Brian. Yes, so I mean, I can answer shortly, yes. Europe through the EU is far stronger on AI regulation. This has been historically true through the 2010s. They've sort of been the pioneers on both creating proactive frameworks for things like if you think of, I forget what the acronym is, the long version, but GDPR, the Privacy Protection Act that they passed in the EU. Um, so they've been strong on privacy measures, and then frameworks for how to responsibly develop AI technologies. A lot has come from the European Union. Notably, when the Biden administration was in power, they were more on par with the European Union. A lot of money and energy was devoted to making frameworks for sort of how I mentioned ethical AI, sustainable AI, um, other things like this. And really, that all went out the window with Trump. Um, I think it was almost that the companies, the big tech companies, were waiting for their chance to renege on their commitments to ethical and sustainable AI, of course. Um, I mean, it's a problem because the companies that develop these technologies are predominantly US based. So the EU also has limited power in enforcing these types of things. So there's this idea that like, EU leads a lot of the discussions and they're much more sane and reasonable. But unless there's mechanisms of enforcement in the United States, it can only go so far, which is, yeah, honestly, really a shame. We can look to the EU, I think, for strategic ways of developing better AI, but I don't think we can necessarily look to the EU for anything like examples of people's movements to put actual pressure on tech or governments to enforce these types of better visions for AI. It's a bit of a long answer. Great question.
Okay, Moji, can you unmute and ask your
Yes.
question?
Hi, Nick. Thank
Emoji.
you so much. I've been shaking my head. My neck is hurting. Um, First of
Very
all, I
sweet
want
compliment.
to invite you to be a speaker in January in a bilingual, binational town hall that I do every other Wednesday, organized by the peace-seeking Iranian veterans.
Oh, I would love
And
to.
and I would love for you to talk about AI and I have a philosophical question to ask you since you are a postdoc and about philosophy, doctor of philosophy and whatever. But the thing I've been working on, and I put the link in the chat since you mentioned we need new ideas,
Hmm.
and it's a Noam Chomsky as well as Cornel West as well as Erica Chenoweth endorsed
Oh, nice.
project called Chambers of Compassion or Intersectional Circles as a way of trying to intersectionally build the kind of collaboration across civil society cause that chambers of commerce are designed for systemic collaboration across industry, and we don't
Hmm,
have that infrastructure. So I would love to write to you. I think you are at nick.rob2@gmail.com. Oh,
exactly. Yes.
all right. Now, I don't want to take too much time. My question is, as I've been watching the hype about AI, I've been thinking about the Holocaust survivor philosopher Hannah Arendt
Hmm.
and the banality of evil or normalizing evil.
Hmm.
So, so give me your thoughts about the how through, I mean, the AI and and the larger context, the computer technology has been used to normalize evil so that we say, oh, that's how things are.
Right.
So
That's a
I'm
fantastic
li
question.
thank you. I'm listening now.
Okay. And I will also say thank you so much for that incredibly generous invitation. I would love to, yeah, be helpful in any way I can for the book
Wonderful.
project. So thank you very much.
It's a bilingual thing that I translate back and forth between Persian and English.
That's amazing.
And
Very cool.
people inside Iran hear it through
Cool.
the Clubhouse application on cell phones and
Okay.
Zoom in this country. I'll write to
Nice.
you back.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, right, on the banality of evil. Yeah, I mean, well, I love that work because I think it's so important, even if it is, yeah, quite serious. It's an incredibly serious work. I mean, I think you could almost jokingly summarize my answer by just referencing the fact that Google's old slogan used to be "Do no evil." They dropped that slogan, and now we see them developing systems to perpetrate a genocide in Palestine. It's There is a lot of normalization of how we could call evil, immoral behavior, militarized ways of thinking that come out of AI technologies. And I think it's a shame because, I mean, on the one hand, you could almost imagine a world where you say, okay, AI is just a tool. It depends on how it's used. But I mean, as I was saying through the history, it's developed in this world that it's been systematically funded by the military. The questions that it's asking about what is intelligence are incredibly military oriented. They're very narrow measures of intelligence. You could also argue they're sort of patriarchal, dominating uh, visions of what it means to be intelligent, such that AI is not, I don't know, being integrated with like, feminist movement, with ways of thinking that are cooperative rather than competitive. Um, so, so all to say, the very even structure of AI and the pursuits of big tech push society in a direction that is more militarized, more patriarchal, um, more narrow-minded and less empathetic. But then at the same time, and this is actually sort of related to my work that I did for my thesis on misinformation. Um, these systems are being used to rip the fabric of society apart. And it's not just being used by whatever Russia or Iran or whatever they say, these foreign actors using social media to whatever. No, it's mostly being done by the government, corporations within the US as they use, technology to lie to you. And even just the things that we practice when we engage with social media, the behaviors and the ways of relating that social media affords us are shallow ways of being in relation to each other that make it harder to empathize with other people because we're communicating through the screen. There's a bit of research about this that shows that the affordances of social media technology are not, they individualize people rather than, to say another slogan, Facebook's, I think, was like connecting the world or something like that. They're connecting the world in an incredibly shallow way that we can see from the platforms. It's not all the platforms, it's obviously the people on the platforms as well, but they do drive us to understand each other less, which is why I really love your idea of chambers of compassion because they're sort of forums of like empathy and dialogue where we can begin to understand each other. So I'm really grateful you brought that up.
Thank you so much. And by the way, the operative word that I use is expanding amorality.
Mm,
They say the Wall Street, for example, all of these big tech people are used to making money through amoral
mhm,
systems, that morality or ethics does not matter. And they are normalizing evil by expanding the scope of amorality, whereby
mm,
moral intelligence or moral consciousness used to be old timers would call conscience does not matter anymore. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you, Moji.
I'm going to die in a few years. As you can see, I'm old.
No,
But you're,
don't say that.
well, but you, no, 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 no. But anyhow, I'll write to you. And
Please
then you
do.
have my phone number.
Thank you so much,
I'm proud
Moji.
of you, son. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alan?
Okay, so my question is kind of ties or relating AI to quantum computing. I see a lot of maybe, quantum computing, there's the hype is that it's going to be able to allow us to solve problems that normal computing can't.
Yes.
But a lot of the development, because the largest quantum computing campus in the US is supposed to be developed a couple miles from where I live. And
Okay.
you get a lot of this is the old US Steel Southwork site on the southeast side of Chicago. It's about
Really?
it's over 420 acres in total that's being developed. The initial campus for the site quantum is about 125 acres. But you have
Wow.
DARPA's planning to be part of the complex. You've got an IBM quantum computing coming in. You've got probably NVIDIA developing a chip factory coming into the
Yeah.
site, all of these things. So, I can see in the hype that, well, the initial things seem to be not so much related to maybe the military and so forth, but the fact that you have DARPA in there, there's a strong interest in developing military connections. And I could foresee a lot of why we need to do this is because we need to keep the military edge,
Right.
just like with AI. So I kind of
Right.
see it like a generation further out of where we are with AI now as to what they're trying to develop. And you get a lot of same issues. You got a data center there that's going to be
Yes.
using up a lot of electricity and water issues and everything. So I just wanted to ask what you see as the connections and so forth.
Right. It's a very good question. Before I start talking, can you remind me what's the name of that center you said is going to
Okay, it's the major tenant, the quantum company is called Psi Quantum. It's PSI, Psi, and then Quantum. It's called the Psi Quantum uh, Microelectronics Park. That's the overall thing. They've already got about 1.8 billion of mainly government backing. Between U.S. government, state government, city government, county government. You
Uh-huh.
know, going into supporting this. A lot of tax breaks. Nevertheless,
Yep.
a lot of community groups are pushing back because you see a lot of gentrification coming up, a lot of issues relating to it's a brownfield. It should have been it's got a lot of the chemicals that you had with uh, you know, I forget, spacey on name, but anyway, it's got the cadmium and all these others that
Right.
are loaded there that it should have been remediated out, but a lot of it might get tossed up in the air when they're doing construction.
Right.
And the actual groundbreaking it keeps getting pushed back. It's going to be in the middle of this year. Now it's maybe January next year, but we'll see.
Right.
But I just wanted to make the connections and ask for your thoughts with regard to quantum computing as connected to AI. So,
Sure. Yeah, and thank you for yeah, like gi giving me the the name of the center as well. I'll keep my eyes on that because I think that's definitely also part of the sort of equation of emerging computational tech that the military is highly interested in. It makes me think of at Tufts we would have each semester a sort of speaker series within the computer science department. And I want to say one whole semester was basically devoted to quantum computing, which is like how much people started to think about, oh, we should get into quantum to start teaching students how it works and apply for research grants and blah blah blah. So it's also, known about within the research circles and sort of being pushed as this cutting edge. I mean, so I'm not an expert in quantum computing, and my knowledge is quite outdated. Um, but the last time I sort of did some decent research to try to figure out if it's at a point where it can actually do anything other than just like multiply a couple numbers. I think I concluded that it really can only multiply a couple numbers. But you know, there's these sort of prognostications of course, when the technology develops and it can multiply more than a few numbers, it'll be able to, how you said, be developed into systems that actually could pose a serious threat to the sort of computational infrastructure that we rely on for security, encryption. Yeah, I'm basically just cryptography, right? I don't think anyone's really relying on quantum to sort of do the type of strategic planning or anything like that. That would be so far in the future. But the most Oh, we have a professor of physics here to ask about quantum computing. So I'll shut up, and I think Dr. Meyer should jump in. So I'll just say that there are analogs for sure, and I think there's the same sort of threat of you know, oh, if China develops quantum, they'll break all our encryptions and we'll be screwed type of rhetoric as well. But yeah, I'm not sure if Holger, if you have any thoughts.
It, Hello, everybody. Yeah, so I've spent time at Fermi National Accelerator Lab in Chicagoland, where they started a new focus on quantum initiatives a couple of years ago, and I'm sure it's some of the same people who are involved in this project, going after different funding sources to set it up outside Fermilab. I think it's going to grow, and I think for the potential to break encryption, it's incredibly important for the military sector. I think it's also incredibly important for anything from online banking to any other type of secure communication. So it's not just military, it's also civilian applications. I think your assessment of so far, it can just multiply a few numbers, is still kind of correct. It's still really the early days. But we have seen advances where it's been just a number of qubits. It's now dozens of qubits that stay coherent for longer times, whatever that means. So there are significant developments, and if those continue at the current rates, then pretty soon I think we may see real commercial applications. The other thing is that it's not just quantum computing, but also quantum secured information transmission. So instead of transmitting information the way we have been through, just regular computers using bits that some man in the middle might intercept, we are going to use quantum encrypted communication that is inherently secure from being intercepted in the same way that traditional communication could be intercepted. And so I think that's another application where we are going to see real change. So anything from countries talking to their embassies overseas to eventually, just securing your online banking communication is going to see those changes, and it's going to be a race to implement that technology faster than others can implement the attacks on the old-fashioned communication using traditional encryption that can be broken with quantum computers. So I think it is something to definitely watch out for. So I don't know if that answers all the questions. I do think that quantum computing is inherently not nearly as energy intensive as AI training.
Right.
So any new infrastructure always requires energy to power it. But I think quantum computing data centers will be on the same order as the traditional data centers that have been powering the internet. So it's not nothing, but it's also not the same level of energy intensity as training AI models.
Let's see. Oh,
Okay,
very interesting.
Sally, do you still have your question, or did you
No,
get it answered?
Nope, I'm good. Thanks.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions?
I was seeing there are a couple in the chat. Did they get answered?
Uh, Someone wanted to know your YouTube channel name.
Is that for the UU one, I think?
Oh, I thought it was for you. Do you have a UU or a YouTube?
Oh, yeah, no, it's at UUJEC if you search YouTube. Let me,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
I don't have one yet. I
I
plan
have a
to.
question.
Sure.
Nick, I mean, there's so many aspects to this. I think I could ask you questions all night, about it. I mean, there's so much information here and the impacts on our society going forward. But one of the things that I would like to ask you about is the intensive energy used to do these AI systems in terms of their impact on climate change.
Yep. Well, it's a good question. This is sort of something that's being actively debated right now. There is actually, let me, I wonder if I could find it. I won't dig it up. I won't take the time to dig it up. I had it on a slide I ended up hiding before the presentation, but um, I was recently seeing there's this Washington Post subgroup or something called like Post Climate, I think is what they're called. I saw this thing come through on Instagram. They made this Instagram post and an article also accompanied it saying, oh, you're concerned about AI impacting the climate. Here are 6 other things that you're doing that impact the climate. And it compared, the number of emissions you would put in or the amount of water you would use by some estimation of average uses of Chat GPT in a day or in a year or something like this, and compared it to things like driving a car, like the average, miles per gallon car in the US, watching TV for like the average number of hours, eating hamburgers. And so it's in those charts from the Washington Post, the sort of impact of using AI as compared to whatever they concocted up for doing these other things looked, I mean, the way they framed it looked incredibly small, right? Which was their point. That was the argument they were trying to make. Also notably, I mean, Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos. So you can never quite know what slant they're trying to put out with this. So I haven't dug into those numbers and I didn't dig super deep into the methodological choices they used to pick these averages to do the comparisons and such. Um, but suffice to say, I mean, I think the way I started to think about it is the emissions and water usage from individual usage of AI systems is at least significant enough, given that they're 7 to 8 times more data to train these models, 5 times more to just issue a query to the uh, AI model. They're enough that for something as stupid as like asking what restaurant you should go to, it's just not even worth using these AI systems for stuff like that, right? Like the gain is so marginal, or to have it like give you a picture of, I don't know, my water bottle, but with cat ears eating a pizza. Like people do things like this, and it's like funny and it's entertaining, but in that sense, it's totally useless. Whereas like we know because we've worked in the climate space from an activist perspective that it's not so easy to say like you can't drive your car because a lot of people need to go to their job or else they'll lose their home. So when programs have been tried to be developed in communities without public transit, for example, to say, oh, don't drive as much. it's pretty hard for people not to do this in the US in a lot of communities because whatever, you have to drive your car. You have to eat food. Unfortunately, yes, the system of big agriculture is hugely polluting. And if you eat a hamburger, it's an environmental disaster, I suppose. But, it's this tactic that has been well documented that big oil, big agriculture used to shift individual blame or blame onto individuals rather than say the whole system is messed up and we shouldn't be making these technologies in the first place or, you know, torturing cows to make hamburgers en masse in the first place. Um, so it's a roundabout kind of, I suppose, cheeky way of answering that I think I would trust, I suppose, that maybe using AI systems is not as bad as doing other climate intensive activities like driving a gas-powered car. Sure. It's also far more useless to use AI systems. And if they're being used to do things like make misinformation, or I also work in education now, so it's people are not learning as much when they're using AI systems to study or to not read something, but to get AI to summarize it. Those are sort of like climate externalities, right? That contribute to the climate crisis, our ability to fight, how we were saying earlier, using technologies, making us more socially apart from one another and not able to cooperate, that contributes to the climate crisis. Right. So there's all sorts of ways that I do think it contributes in ways that we may not immediately think about. Um, but I do have to admit, I'm sure it's not as much as like doing other climate intensive things, if that makes sense.
Nick, I'm going
Thank
to take
you.
a question from the chat. We know capitalism is the problem and
Right.
socialism is the solution. So, what does a socialist AI future look like?
It's a good question. Sort of related to the I think there was another one in the chat about like, is ethical AI kind of greenwashing AI? It's a good question. Um, I mean, a socialist future for AI, the way I've been thinking about it so far, which is mostly from like thinking about it in terms of any technology, like, because I was thinking about misinformation for so long in social media. It's, I think at the core of it is this idea that big tech should not exist, right? We should not have these companies making hundreds of billions of dollars of profit and exploiting the planet in the process, weakening society in the process. So from that standpoint, maybe these companies would not exist in the form that they exist, or they wouldn't choose the projects that they choose if, for example, they were run by their own workers, right? Which is why I love and I really wanted to uplift this sort of nascent unionization drive that's happening within tech. Um, I was really heartened by the Google workers that created a sort of unofficial union. They're not recognized by the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, which doesn't give them certain legal protections, but a union in essence, right, is just yeah, I feel like I'm on Gregory's page. It's even more radical because you don't really have to conform to these like legal whatever things that the NLRB pushes on you, but it's this idea that if tech workers ran their own institutions, if academics were not so beholden to big tech or military funding or the pressures of their, universities to publish, 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 bring in more money, but they actually ran their own universities, I'm sure they would not pursue these stupid things, right? That's the first part of what I see as a socialist future for AI. It might have just not even happened if workers were controlling their own companies, right?
It looks
Okay,
like,
Holger.
yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It, I disclaimer, I was not able to listen into all of it. I had to step out. So if this was addressed, I'm sorry for asking this. But I think it's worse than just the climate impact of the carbon dioxide emitted in generating the power. There's also the issue that it drives up utility electric costs for those who can least afford it. So it's really a social justice issue, and it's a redistribution of wealth, intentionally or not, from the bottom to the top. And so I think some of the tech companies are aware that that's the impact, but I haven't seen any of them taking steps to address it. The only way they are addressing the energy issue is trying to ensure that they have reliable power. And in some instances, that means purchasing their own nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania or building their own nuclear power plant. But that's not sustainable at all and not helpful at all. And so in most places, it leads to increased carbon emissions in the neighborhoods where air quality is already poor, and utility electric prices being driven up that need to be paid by all ratepayers, by everybody. You don't have a choice. So there's already people getting disconnected for not being able to afford the electric bill, and that's likely going to get worse. So that's just another issue that's already exists, but is going to get worse because of AI the way it's currently done. I want to make one more point. Currently, AI is very energy intensive. It is not at all clear that that's going to remain to be true, because we all have, brains between our ears that are more capable in many ways than the most capable large language models currently. Also, those are more capable than us in certain ways as well. But our brains use about 25 watts of power, not megawatts like these data centers, and yet have capabilities exceeding what those data centers put out. And so there's also a high risk for these investments in data centers that may all be stranded investments if somebody makes a genius breakthrough that drastically reduces the energy needed to train these models. And although there's no indication that this definitely will happen, there's each and every one of our brains proves that it doesn't need to take as much energy as it currently does. And so there's a prospect for the energy need of AI to go down any moment at a random point.
Definitely. And yes, thank you so much. Those are absolutely totally correct points, and I'm super glad you brought them up. On the one of the reduced energy burden of AI models, I wanted to also say as a great example of what you just said, earlier in the year, I think in the spring or so, one of China's models, which is called DeepSeek, drastically reduced the amount of data that was needed to train a model to perform better at the same level as the US big tech companies. So you're exactly right. There could just be a breakthrough. And our brains don't need to consume the whole internet to know how to have a conversation. So I'm totally in agreement with you. Thank you so much. Great
Okay,
points.
Sally, can you wind up the questions?
Well, I'm going to push back a little on the isolation of social media, and it isn't quite social media, but being part of a digital group, as I was in my Barack Obama, we actually became really, at least temporarily, kind of close to each other. We became, so in a sense, it does bring people together. At the same time, it can create the, envy and isolation and that kind of crap too. I wouldn't trust Bezos or Washington Post for anything anymore. But yeah, they always try and either make you feel good about doing bad stuff or blame you for all the problems that are really policy problems. And look at the subsidies that too many governments are giving to nuclear plants and others for the data centers and the water and everything else. So just some comments.
Yes.
Cindy, did you have any last words? not to put you on the spot. Well, I think we need to thank Nick. We've kept him the full 90 minutes, plus 15 before, an hour and 45 minutes. So thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation.
You.
Something I think we all need to be aware of.
Yes,
And
thank you so much for having me and for the incredible discussion. This is such a lovely, engaged group. So I like learned a lot after the conclusion. So thank you so much in return.
We really appreciate you, Nick, and appreciate everyone for coming out. Thank you so very much. It makes it meaningful to do these when people show up and are engaged.
Yeah. Okay.
okay.
The contact, also uujec.net is where our new site that will become uujec.org when we get it finished.
Okay. And good night.